He had no interest in love, no desire for marriage. What he wanted was an heir, a child, not born from affection, but from an arrangement as cold and calculated as the contracts he signed every day. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Ethan Caldwell understood deals. He understood numbers, leverage, outcomes, but love was unpredictable, messy, dangerous. He had seen it too many times. How emotions turned sharp, how promises cracked under pressure. In his world, affection was just another currency, and a volatile one at that. So he closed the door on it. No wife, no romance, no strings, just one clear, clinical solution to continue his bloodline. Find a woman. Make an arrangement. Deliver an heir. From his office on the 62nd floor, the city below looked small, manageable, like chess pieces waiting for the next move. But while Ethan lived above it all, surrounded by polished marble, chrome, and glass, down on the streets, life told a very different story. It was there, beneath the harsh flicker of a broken street lamp, that Lucy Bennett stood. No chauffeur, no boardroom, no safety net. Only a cardboard box filled with hand-wrapped candies and a heart too stubborn to give up. Her coat was thin, her shoes worn at the soles, but her back remained straight. She wasn't selling sweets for ambition. She wasn't chasing dreams of success. She was fighting to keep her mother alive. Every dollar she earned went straight to hospital bills. Medicine that delayed the inevitable. Treatments that bought time at a price she could barely pay. Their worlds should never have collided. But desperation has a way of blurring lines. The invitation came without warning. Clean white envelope, no return address, just a date, a time, and the towering name, Caldwell Enterprises. Curiosity might have made her open it, but it was love for her mother that made her show up. The office was colder than she expected. Not just the temperature, but the silence, the shine of the floor, the way the city glared through those massive windows like a watchful eye. Ethan barely looked at her when she walked in. His gaze stayed on the file in front of him, flipping through pages as if she were already a footnote. Finally he spoke, calm, businesslike. "Miss Bennett, I have a proposal for you." Lucy said nothing. She stood there, still as stone, hands folded tightly in front of her. "I require a child, an heir, but I have no intention of marriage, nor the interest in any emotional entanglement. I will compensate you generously for your time and for the inconvenience of pregnancy. Medical care, housing, expenses, all covered." He looked up at her then. His voice did not waver. "But when the child is born, the baby will be mine, entirely. No smile, no apology, just terms, like any other business deal. But this wasn't a business deal to Lucy. It was her body, her dignity, and the life of a child he was already speaking of as property. The anger rose so quickly it nearly choked her. "You think you can buy me?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air between them. "I'm not for sale." She turned on her heel, head held high, and walked out of that office without a second glance. But what neither of them knew was that the story had only just begun. Because there are some choices in life that pride alone can't afford. And when love for someone else becomes the weight dragging you under, even the worst offers can start to look like a lifeline. The first time Ethan Caldwell made his offer, Lucy Bennett stood her ground. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She looked him square in the eye, chin lifted, jaw tight, and answered with a voice steadier than she felt. "I'm not for sale." There was no hesitation, no doubt. Just those 4 words, sharp as the edge of a blade. And then she turned, walked out of his office, and let the heavy glass doors close behind her with a quiet, deliberate click. For a moment, Ethan barely reacted. He simply returned to his paperwork, as if her refusal was nothing more than an expected inconvenience. But for Lucy, that moment stayed with her long after she stepped back onto the busy street. The truth was, it wasn't pride that kept her standing tall that day. It was love. Love for the woman lying in that rented hospital bed, her chest rising and falling too quickly, each breath a battle of its own. Lucy had spent months fighting, selling candies on street corners, picking up odd jobs that paid too little and came too late. Every night, she counted the bills. Every morning, she watched the numbers fall short. And now, the doctors were running out of patience. "We need to begin the next round of treatment immediately," they said. "Without it, there's not much time." Lucy sat by her mother's bedside that night, holding her hand, listening to the rasp of her breathing. She pressed her forehead gently to the back of her mother's fragile fingers. The same hands that once braided her hair wiped away her childhood tears. There, in the quiet hum of medical machines, Lucy asked herself the question no daughter should ever have to face. How much is your pride worth when the life of the person you love most is on the line? The next morning she stood again at the foot of Ethan Caldwell's glass tower. This time her steps were slower, heavier, but her eyes burned with a fire that hadn't dimmed. The receptionist looked up in surprise as Lucy pushed open the doors, her posture unyielding. No appointment, no warning. Ethan was seated behind his desk, reviewing a contract when she walked in. Their eyes met. She didn't wait for him to speak. "I'll do it." Her words hung there between them, not weak, not defeated, but deliberate. "But on my terms." Ethan raised one brow, leaning back in his chair, studying her. "Go on. You will pay for my mother's care," Lucy said, her voice low but clear. "Every bill, every treatment, until the day she no longer needs it." There was a flicker, so slight most wouldn't have caught it, in Ethan's expression. A brief pause before he nodded once, curt. "Agreed." No congratulations, no pleasantries. He slid the contract across the desk toward her like it was nothing more than the next line item on his agenda. Lucy reached for the pen. Her hand hovered there, suspended between everything she believed about herself and everything she was willing to sacrifice. And then, she signed. Each letter of her name felt like a small betrayal, but also like a promise, not to Ethan, not to herself, but to the woman lying in that hospital bed, waiting for help that only this choice could bring. The deal was done. The ink was dry. On paper, it was clean. Clinical. Transactional. But somewhere beneath the surface, something had already shifted, because no matter how clear the contract, no arrangement can truly keep the heart from feeling. Not forever. The contract was clear, every term, every clause, written in ink so black it seemed to drain the warmth from the page. No attachments, no emotions, no expectations beyond the agreement. Ethan Caldwell had designed it that way, deliberately. Control was the only language he trusted, but life, as it often does, rarely obeys the fine print. The weeks passed quietly. Lucy, with the same quiet strength she'd shown from the beginning, followed every medical instruction, attended every appointment. She never missed a visit, never asked for more than what was promised. And Ethan kept his distance. At least, he tried. It was the third ultrasound, another sterile examination room, another technician moving a wand across Lucy's stomach, narrating the progress like it was just another report. But then, the sound, soft at first, almost mechanical, then stronger. A steady, rhythmic pulse. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. The heartbeat, the tiny, persistent sound of life. For a moment, Ethan stood still, one hand in the pocket of his suit, the other resting on the back of the leather chair beside him, a casual pose, carefully practiced. But his fingers tightened against the cool leather. His jaw set just a little too hard. He didn't speak, but his eyes didn't leave the monitor. Lucy noticed. She caught the smallest shift in his posture, the way his shoulders seemed less square, how his gaze softened, just barely, as he watched the flicker of that tiny heart on the screen. The doctor continued talking, measurements, growth rates, numbers, and percentages. But Ethan heard none of it. All he could hear was that heartbeat, steady, defiant, real. When the appointment ended, Lucy reached for her coat, slow and careful. She paused, glancing toward Ethan, half expecting him to leave first, to exit the room as detached as he'd entered. But he didn't move. Not right away. Instead, he stood there, staring at the monitor even after the screen had gone dark. Finally, he spoke. Not to the doctor, not to Lucy, but almost to himself. "It's strong." Just 2 words. Quiet, almost unsure of themselves. Lucy nodded, her hand resting instinctively on the curve of her belly. "Yes," she said softly. "Very strong." For the first time, their eyes met without the barrier of the contract between them. No anger, no defense, just 2 people, standing in the quiet gravity of something neither of them had planned for. Ethan turned away first, clearing his throat, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve as if to shake off the moment. "I'll have the car brought around," he said, his voice back to its familiar evenness. But Lucy had already seen it. That slight hesitation. The faintest crack in the armor. And for the first time, she wondered, beneath all that steel and strategy, what kind of man Ethan Caldwell might have been, if life had been a little kinder. If this story reminded you of someone, or brought up a feeling, let me know in the comments below. I read every one of them. There are nights when the city itself seems quieter, when even the lights from the skyline feel softer, blurred beneath a curtain of fog and rain. It was on such a night that Lucy found Ethan Caldwell not in his usual place, not behind a desk or locked behind a contract, but alone, seated in the corner of his sprawling living room, a half-empty glass of whiskey resting loosely in one hand. The room around him was vast, elegant, designed with the precision of a man who liked things exactly where they should be. But tonight, the air felt different. Still. Heavy. Ethan didn't look up when Lucy stepped through the open door. He only swirled the amber liquid in his glass, eyes fixed on the slow spin of it, as if the answer to something waited there at the bottom. "Couldn't sleep?" Lucy asked softly. No reply. Just the faint creak of leather beneath his grip. She stayed by the doorway at first, unsure if he even wanted her there. But then, he spoke. "Do you know what my father said to me, the day my mother died?" His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It was tired, worn thin by years of carrying something too heavy alone. Lucy didn't answer. She simply waited. Ethan's eyes stayed down, watching the slow movement of the whiskey as though it steadied him. "He told me to stop crying, said weakness was a stain a man could never wash off." There was a pause, long enough that Lucy thought he might stop there. But the words kept coming, softer now, each one peeling back a layer of the armor he had worn so well. "She was the only person who ever made that house feel like home. She sang to me at night, read to me by the fire. When she was gone, the silence was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere beneath the city hum, the faint sound of car horns echoed in the distance. Life going on as if none of this mattered. But here, in this room, Ethan sat motionless. except for the hand that tightened once more around the glass before setting it down on the table with care. I was 8. The words dropped into the quiet like stones. I learned very quickly that in my father's house, softness was punished, grief was weakness, control was survival. Lucy took a step closer, then another, until she was standing just a few feet away. She could see now the way his shoulders curled inward, not from the weight of success, but from a lifetime of holding back what he was never allowed to feel. I stopped crying that day, Ethan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. And I never started again. For a moment neither of them spoke. The ticking of the clock on the far wall filled the silence, counting out seconds like the slow drip of water into an empty well. Lucy watched him, her eyes softer now, not with pity, but with something closer toward cognition. Understanding, because this was not the man who had offered her a contract with clinical detachment. This was not the ruthless CEO who measured life in risks and percentages. This was the boy left behind. The boy who had learned too soon that to survive, he had to become stone. "I didn't know," she said quietly. Ethan's gaze lifted at last, meeting hers across the distance. "No," he replied. "You weren't supposed to." And then, for the first time, Lucy saw it. Not the power, not the wealth, not the control, but the loneliness, the terrible, aching loneliness of a child who had spent his life mistaking walls for safety. It started with a call, late afternoon, a Tuesday. Ethan was in a meeting, numbers on the screen, voices in the room, the usual chess game of negotiations. His phone buzzed once, then again, persistent. At first he ignored it. Then he saw the name flashing across the display, Lucy's doctor. The words that followed hit harder than any business failure ever could. "She's in trouble. You need to come. Now." No details. No time for questions. Just the urgency in the doctor's voice, sharp, unshaken. Ethan didn't excuse himself. He didn't finish the meeting. He stood, walked out, fast. The elevator couldn't move quickly enough. The car ride was a blur of red lights and impatient horns. He barely noticed the city rushing past, his grip white-knuckled on the leather seat. By the time he reached the hospital, the world outside had narrowed to a single thought. "Don't let me be too late." Lucy was already behind the double doors of the emergency ward when he arrived. Nurses moving quickly, voices low, serious. Ethan tried to follow. A nurse stepped in front of him. "Sir, you can't. She's carrying my child." The words came out rougher than he meant. His voice cracked at the edges, something wild beneath it. The nurse hesitated, then nodded, motioning toward the waiting area. But waiting had never been Ethan's strength. He paced, back and forth, hands clenched so tightly his nails dug into his palms. His breath came shallow. Too fast, the walls felt too close, the silence too loud. Through the small window in the door, he could see the edge of the hospital bed. Lucy's silhouette curled in pain, her face pale, her body trembling under the weight of something neither of them could control. A doctor appeared. Mask pulled low, eyes steady. "We're doing everything we can." "Not enough, not for Ethan. Tell me what's happening. The baby's in distress. There's a risk of miscarriage." The words slammed into him. Hard, unforgiving. His chest tightened, his jaw clenched. This wasn't a deal he could renegotiate. This wasn't a crisis he could outmaneuver. This was life, raw, fragile, slipping between his fingers. He sat down, hands tangled in his hair, elbows on his knees. And for the first time, Ethan Caldwell trembled, the man who never wavered, who held the world at arm's length, who believed control was the only way to stay safe, now shaking, powerless. And in that moment, the truth rose in him like a wave he couldn't hold back. It wasn't just the child, it wasn't just the heir, it was Lucy. Lucy, with her stubborn pride, her fierce eyes, her quiet strength. The woman he had told himself was nothing more than a means to an end. But she wasn't. Not anymore. "Please," he whispered, voice barely audible. "Please save her. Save both of them." It wasn't a command. It wasn't a demand. It was a plea. A raw, human cry from a man who, for the first time, had something to lose that no amount of money could replace. Somewhere down the hallway, machines beeped steadily, a heartbeat counting time that felt too slow, too cruel. Ethan pressed his hands together, bowed his head. "Please." The soft beep of the heart monitor was the first sound Lucy heard as she drifted back toward consciousness. The light in the hospital room was low, diffused by the thin curtain pulled halfway across the window. Shadows moved gently along the walls, the slow dance of late afternoon light and the hush of machines at work. Her body ached, heavy, weighted down by exhaustion. But then came the voice. Calm, steady, familiar. Both mother and baby are safe. The words didn't rush at her. They settled softly, like the warmth of sunlight after too many days of rain. Lucy's eyes fluttered open. It took a moment for the blur to clear, and there he was. Ethan. Sitting at her bedside, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, both hands wrapped tightly around hers, as if letting go might cost him more than he could bear. He didn't speak right away. There were no grand declarations, no carefully chosen words, just his grip, firm, protective, his thumb tracing slow, uncertain circles along the back of her hand. His eyes stayed on her, searching for something. Permission. Forgiveness. Maybe just the reassurance that she was still here. For the first time since this strange, fragile arrangement had begun, Lucy didn't see the man who had slid a contract across a polished desk. She saw the man who hadn't left her side, the man whose tie was loosened, whose sleeves were rumpled, whose face wore the raw edges of sleepless worry. And there, beneath the tired lines around his eyes, was something else. Fear, relief, and something deeper, something unspoken. Lucy's lips parted, but no words came. She didn't need them. Her fingers moved weakly, but enough to squeeze his hand back, just once. Simple. Honest. And Ethan, the man who lived his life behind walls of steel and glass, blinked hard against the sting behind his eyes. The room held the silence between them gently, not as emptiness, but as understanding. In that moment, neither of them thought about the deal they had made. Neither spoke of obligations or terms. There was only this: a woman fighting her way back to life, and the man who realized he could no longer keep his heart out of it. His other hand reached up, almost unsure, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead, tucking it softly behind her ear. His touch lingered there for a moment, careful, not like a gesture rehearsed, but like one finally given permission to be real. When his gaze met hers again, there was no distance left between them, no transaction, no contract, only two people sitting at the fragile edge of something neither of them had dared to name. Until now. The sky was heavy that morning, a soft gray stretched across the horizon, the kind of sky that holds back its rain, as if even the weather understood the weight of the day. The funeral was small, quiet, just as her mother would have wanted. No grand speeches, no elaborate flowers, only a few close friends, some neighbors from the old building, and the daughter who had never left her side. Lucy stood at the edge of the gravesite, one hand resting on the wooden casket as if touching it might keep her mother close just a little longer. Her face was pale, but steady, eyes red, but dry. Strength, even now. But grief has its own language, and the bravest hearts still bleed beneath the surface. Ethan Caldwell did not stand beside her. Not at first. Instead, he kept a respectful distance, hands folded quietly in front of him, shoulders straight, posture composed, but his eyes never left her. In the soft rustle of the trees, the hush of the gathered mourners, Ethan stood as a silent witness to a pain he could not fix, could not negotiate away. No words would have been enough here. And for once, Ethan knew better than to try. When the service ended, people drifted away in pairs, gentle nods, whispered condolences. Lucy stayed. Alone. She knelt there, fingers brushing the earth, head bowed. The quiet of her mourning. It was only when the last guest had gone that Ethan moved, slowly, without fanfare. He didn't speak. He didn't touch her. He simply stood a few feet behind, his presence steady, unmoving. There. It wasn't the act of a man who came to console. It was the act of a man who came to hold space, who understood that sometimes the greatest kindness is to remain. Later, when the sun began its slow descent behind the hills, Ethan handled the arrangements, quietly, efficiently. He spoke with the funeral director, saw to the transportation, paid the balance without a word. He didn't ask Lucy if she needed help. He simply helped. And when the weight of exhaustion finally caught up to her, when her body folded into the worn armchair in her mother's apartment, shoulders shaking beneath the effort of holding herself together, Ethan was still there, not offering platitudes, not reaching for the right thing to say, just there. Sitting across from her, his hands loosely clasped, waiting. Present. Real. It would be easy to miss the significance of such stillness, but Lucy saw it. In the quiet between them, in the absence of all the wrong words, she felt it. This was not the Ethan Caldwell who had once treated everything, and everyone, like a business transaction. This was the man who had stayed, without asking for anything in return. And in that stillness, something inside her softened. For the first time, she looked at him, truly looked, and saw not the CEO, not the strategist, not the cold, calculated man who had hired her. She saw the person who had learned, slowly and painfully, how to show up, how to remain, how to care, even when no one was watching. The delivery room was still. Only the soft rhythm of the monitor and the quiet urgency of nurses filled the space. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that somewhere in this small, bright room, a life was beginning. And so was something Ethan Caldwell had never expected to feel. He stood near the door at first, arms crossed, trying to hold on to the familiar armor of distance. But as the cries of the newborn echoed into the air, raw, fierce, undeniable, something inside him broke loose. The doctor turned, gently placing the tiny, wrinkled body into Ethan's hands. "Here's your son." For a moment, Ethan froze. The weight of the child so small, and yet heavier than anything he had ever carried. His hands trembled. Oliver's eyes were tightly shut, fists clenched, chest rising and falling with stubborn, determined life. His cry filled the room, not weak, but strong, demanding to be heard. Ethan looked down at the boy. Really looked, and the walls he had spent a lifetime building began to fall. He didn't speak. Not at first. He simply held the child closer, the way a man holds something too precious to trust his own hands with. Then came the tears. Quiet at first, almost a surprise to himself. But they kept coming, not dramatic, not loud, just steady, honest, the kind of tears a man sheds when something inside him softens for the first time. Lucy, exhausted but awake, watched him from the bed. She saw the way his shoulders shook as he cradled their son, the way he leaned his head down, pressing his lips gently to the boy's forehead. When he finally looked at her, There was no trace of the man who had once spoken of contracts and conditions. There was only Ethan. Bare. Real. "I don't want you to leave," he whispered, his voice rough, breaking. "I don't need a contract. I need you, and I need him." No grand speeches, no promises carved in stone, just one man, finally brave enough to say what his heart had always known. Out loud. In that quiet moment, under the soft glow of the hospital lights, a child was born. And so was a father. The air was still that evening. The last light of day spilled softly through the windows, casting long, gentle shadows across the quiet room. Lucy stood by the crib, rocking Oliver slowly, humming a tune so soft it barely touched the walls. Behind her, Ethan watched, not with the sharp gaze of a man used to making decisions, but with the quiet awe of someone who finally understood what it meant to want something not for power, but for love. When Lucy turned, Ethan was there, standing by the small table near the window, holding something in the center of his palm. No box, no velvet, just the ring itself. Simple, worn smooth by time. "It's my mother's," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "She wore it every day of her life. She once told me—" "A family is where your heart is safe," Ethan swallowed hard, fingers closing briefly around the ring as if steadying himself. "I didn't understand it back then. I didn't believe it could be true. But now, I do." He stepped closer, the small gold band resting open in his hand. Not shining, not perfect, but full of history. "I don't have grand words, Lucy, and I know I've made mistakes. But if you'll let me, I want to build that safe place with you. Will you marry me?" There was no kneeling, no staged performance, just Ethan, standing before her, open, human, asking not as a man making an offer, but as a man making a choice. Lucy didn't speak at first. Tears welled quietly in her eyes as she reached out, her fingers brushing the ring before taking his hand into hers. And then, through the blur of tears, she nodded. Slow. Certain, the kind of yes that doesn't need words. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hand tightened gently around hers as he slipped the ring onto her finger, the simple gold band fitting perfectly, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, one hand cradling the back of her head. For the first time, Lucy felt the warmth of him fully, not guarded, not controlled, but real. Present. Home. The wedding was small. No chandeliers, no grand speeches, just a quiet ceremony beneath the soft canopy of trees in the backyard of their home. A few close friends, simple flowers, the sound of birds in the afternoon air. Lucy wore a modest dress, her hand resting gently in Ethan's as they exchanged vows. Not promises of perfection, but of choosing each other again and again, through whatever life might bring. There were no spotlights, no staged photos, only the honest warmth of two people who knew exactly what it meant to lose, to break, and still to stay. Time moved forward, as it always does. Oliver learned to walk beneath the steady gaze of his father, his tiny fingers gripping Ethan's hand as if it were the safest place in the world. Emily came next, curious, wide-eyed, with her mother's gentle spirit. Then Noah, their youngest, whose laughter seemed to fill every corner of the house. The days were not always easy. There were sleepless nights, small frustrations, lessons learned one patient step at a time. But there was laughter, shared meals, quiet talks under the stars, and love, not the sweeping, cinematic kind, but the quiet, consistent love that shows itself in the smallest gestures. a hand reaching across the table, a coat draped over tired shoulders, a kiss pressed to a child's forehead before bed. Most afternoons, if you passed by their home, you might catch a glimpse of them in the garden. Ethan, no longer the distant man behind glass towers, crouched in the grass, playing catch with Oliver, lifting Emily high onto his shoulders, laughing as Noah chased after them on unsteady legs. Lucy nearby, watching, smiling that soft smile of someone who knows what it means to fight for peace, and to finally find it. Love, they had learned, isn't found in contracts or promises written on paper. It lives in the choice we make each day, to show up, to forgive, to stay, not because we have to, but because we want to. The wedding was small. No chandeliers, no grand speeches, just a quiet ceremony beneath the soft canopy of trees in the backyard of their home. A few close friends, simple flowers, the sound of birds in the afternoon air. Lucy wore a modest dress, her hand resting gently in Ethan's as they exchanged vows, not promises of perfection, but of choosing each other again and again through whatever life might bring. There were no spotlights, no staged photos, only the honest warmth of two people who knew exactly what it meant to lose, to break, and still, to stay. Time moved forward, as it always does. Oliver learned to walk beneath the steady gaze of his father, his tiny fingers gripping Ethan's hand as if it were the safest place in the world. Emily came next, curious, wide-eyed, with her mother's gentle spirit. Then Noah, their youngest, whose laughter seemed to fill every corner of the house. The days were not always easy. There were sleepless nights, small frustrations, lessons learned one patient step at a time. But there was laughter, shared meals, quiet talks under the stars, and love, not the sweeping, cinematic kind, but the quiet, consistent love that shows itself in the smallest gestures. A hand reaching across the table. A coat draped over tired shoulders, a kiss pressed to a child's forehead before bed. Most afternoons, if you passed by their home, you might catch a glimpse of them in the garden. Ethan, no longer the distant man behind glass towers, crouched in the grass, playing catch with Oliver, lifting Emily high onto his shoulders, laughing as Noah chased after them on unsteady legs. Lucy nearby, watching, smiling that soft smile of someone who knows what it means to fight for peace, and to finally find it. Love, they had learned, isn't found in contracts or promises written on paper. It lives in the choice we make each day, to show up, to forgive, to stay. Not because we have to, but because we want to. Thank you so much for staying with this story until the very end. Now, I'd truly love to hear from you. On a scale from 1 to 10, how much did this story move you? Did it touch your heart, make you reflect, or perhaps remind you of your own journey? Please feel free to share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. I read every message, and your words, your reflections. They mean more than you know. Thank you for being here.